Good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from the Young Americans Business Trust at the Organization of American States. My name is Luis Viguria, and I am the CEO of the Young Americans Business Trust, an organization created at the OAS to support the social and economic development of young people and a partner organization of the Youth Power Learning Program. Today, we're pleased to host Mrs. Heather Sutton, Research Coordinator on Crime and Violence in the Caribbean at the Inter-American Development Bank, who will lead the session on citizen security and at-risk youth in the Caribbean. During this session, Heather will present the key findings from the IDB research and experience implementing projects. We encourage all the participants to have an open conversation with the presenter. The webinar is part of the Youth Power Community of Practice on Youth, Peace, and Security, and it is held within the framework of the International Peace Day. The Youth in Peace and Security Community of Practice focuses on one of the most pressing issues, youth affected by conflict and violence, both as victims and as perpetrators. The COP aims to promote the role of youth in peace building, conflict mitigation, and violence prevention in development programs, seeking to create more peaceful communities. In pursuit of these goals, members of the COP, including experts, practitioners, young people, and others interested in the topic worldwide, will build the evidence-based sharing discussion from both field and academic knowledge to reach positive youth development and peace building. Upon establishing the connection, the COP will design and disseminate actionable learning for implementers to incorporate into their programming. Before starting the webinar, I would like to give the microphone to my colleague, Jose Cloutier, who will share with you very important instructions regarding the use of the platform and the methodology used for the session. Jose, the mic is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Luis. So just a couple of technical questions regarding your participation in the webinar. We will have a questions and answers session towards the end of Ms. Sutton's presentation. For that, we encourage you, as the presentation goes, to type down your questions on the questions tab you will see on the control panel of the software, of the GoToWebinar software. So if you're seeing that, if you're not seeing it, there's a red arrow you can push, and it will show you the full control panel. There you will be able to see either the chat or the questions tab, and by clicking there you'll be able to type down your question. So as Ms. Sutton presents the topic, you can type down the questions, and towards the Q&A session we will be reading those questions aloud to her and she can answer them. The other method of participating is if you are sure that you have a working microphone, you can push the raised hand button. This is a button with a hand. Once you push it, we will know that you want to speak, so we will unmute your microphone in an orderly fashion so that you can go ahead and make your question or your intervention through your microphone. Those are the two general ways of asking the questions, so please make sure to raise the hand button if you are sure that your microphone is working. We will unmute your microphone and you can do the question that way, or you can type down the questions on the chat or questions tab. So those are the only two things regarding the questions. I'm going to give the microphone back to Mr. Viguria so that we can begin with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. And now I would like to welcome Heather and give her the floor to begin her presentation. Heather Sutton, as mentioned before, is an IDB consultant in citizen security. She's a research coordinator for several IDB projects on crime and violence in the Caribbean, involving the Victimization Surveys and Surveys on Violence Against Women. Before joining the IDB, Heather worked as a researcher, project manager, and activist on subjects of public safety, armed violence, and gun control for the Brazilian NGO Instituto Saúde Paz, She holds a master's degree in public administration from the Monterrey Institute of International Studies and a Bachelor's of Arts degree in International Affairs from Colorado University. Heather, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for the session today.
Hi. Thank you very much, Luis, and thank you everyone who's online. I'm looking forward to a rich discussion on this topic. Hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions and discussion. So, as Luis mentioned, I coordinate a number of research initiatives at the Inter-American Development Bank related to crime and violence in the Caribbean. I'd like to preface my presentation by mentioning that I've had a lot of good input from colleagues in the field that I have to thank, particularly in Bahamas and Jamaica. And I hope that if there are any questions that I'm not able to answer, that I may refer you to them, because they are the true experts on the ground doing the work in field. So I'll just start with a bit of an outline of what I'll talk about over the next 20 minutes or so, hopefully. I'm going to give a little bit of background and context in terms of youth as victims and perpetrators of crime and violence in the Caribbean region. And then I'll go into a little bit of an overview on how the Inter-American Development Bank has supported work of governments in the Caribbean region through citizen security programs, and particularly how those citizen security programs have focused on youth. And I'll go into a couple of examples. One is from a pilot program that we have in the Bahamas, and another in Jamaica, which is our actually a longest standing program on citizen security and justice in the Caribbean. So first of all, what do we know about crime and violence in the region? We know that the Caribbean has some of the highest homicide rates in the world, and that those homicide rates have roughly doubled over the last 10 years. Within the Latin American region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we see the Caribbean and Central America have some of the highest homicide rates, and particularly the countries where the IDB is supporting citizen security programs have homicide rates that are far off this chart that you see here. They're beyond 30 per 100,000. So, for example, in Jamaica and the Bahamas. We also know that crime and violence are severe obstacles to development. In the last 10 years, there have been a couple of recent studies on the Caribbean region, two major ones by the UN ODC and the World Bank in 2007, and the UNDP Human Development Report in 2012, that really focus on this and show that both crime and violence are serious obstacles to long-term growth and development for the region. And finally, there is a bit of a, let's say, the magnitude and the concern for the problem have not been matched with equally robust responses in terms of empirical studies showing what programs work, what programs don't work, and how this has influenced policy making. And a bit of that is due to relative lack of studies and a lack of comprehensive data that's available in the region, which is more routinely found in some other countries, Latin American countries, for example, where the IDB supports other initiatives. My job has been, in part, to help close that data gap by supporting a number of data generation initiatives and collection of secondary data, administrative data in the region, which I'll share a little bit with you right now. I'm going to share with you these are results from a recent victimization survey, set of victimization surveys that we did in 5 Caribbean countries. The results of this will be coming out in a forthcoming report later this year from the IDB. But I'll share with you some of the initial findings. And that is, you can see here on the screen, we've got the prevalence rates for 4 different types of crime for 5 capital metro areas. New Providence in the Bahamas, Kingston metropolitan area in Jamaica, Greater Bridgetown area in Barbados, Port of Spain metro area in Trinidad and Tobago, and Paramaribo in Suriname. And what calls our attention here really is the amount of violent crime in the Caribbean. So for those of you who are not familiar with prevalence rates, this is the percentage of the population who has been a victim of each of these types of crime in the last 12 months. We can see the red dotted line is the Caribbean average, and the blue dotted line would be the global average based on international crime victimization surveys. And you can see, for example, the 2 lower graphs, robbery and burglary, you can see that the Caribbean average is about on par with with the global average. For theft, in fact, the Caribbean average is far lower than the global average. So you have lower levels of theft across all 5 capital metro areas. But when we look at assault and threat particularly, we see that the rates are far higher. There's particularly high rates in New Providence, in Bahamas, and Kingston metropolitan area. And in fact, these rates are higher than the regional average for Latin America and for Africa. So within these groups of victims, we know that youth, well, worldwide studies have found that delinquent behavior is actually not consistent throughout the life cycle of an individual, right? So they tend to be strongly concentrated during youth. And because youth come into contact more often with other youth through their peer circles, they also tend to be higher rates of victimization. And the Caribbean is no exception. And I'll just show you a table here. This table shows the percentage of youth as percentage of the population versus their representation amongst homicide victims. And we've got, particularly in the categories of 18 to 25-year-old and 26 to 35-year-old young adults. When we look over here in this last column, the odds ratio, this is an expression of how many more times the group is represented in victimization compared to their representation in the population. So an odds ratio of 1 would be equally represented. Larger than 1 implies that the group is overrepresented for a particular type of victimization. We can see very clearly that in terms of homicides, youth 18 to 25 and 26 to 35 across these 4 Caribbean countries that we have here are highly, disproportionately represented as homicide victims. In terms of other crimes that youth are also victims of, we have, again, this is from the victimization surveys that I mentioned earlier. And you can see on the left, the spider graph shows the total population, the prevalence rates, for the percentage of the population that was a victim for each of these 6 crimes. And on the right-hand side, we have for ages 18 to 24. And you can see that the radius is much larger, right? So the prevalence rates are much higher for 18 to 24-year-olds, and particularly, again, for assault and threat. Particularly in New Providence and Kingston metropolitan area, we see the most severe rates. In terms of youth as perpetrators, the administrative data that we have on the flip side here is much more limited. But we do have some evidence that suggests that there are large portions of those who are arrested and imprisoned are disproportionately youth and young adults. So again, we have on the top here, this is the youth population as a percentage of homicide arrests, and the youth as a percentage of prison admissions. On the top, we've got Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, and below, Bahamas and Jamaica. And again, if we look at those odds ratios, we're finding larger than 1. Or for example, in the Bahamas, the odds ratio of 3 for 18 to 25-year-olds indicates that this age group is 3 times more likely to be imprisoned compared to their representation in the population. Now, all of this shows us that youth are a particularly important category of individuals for us to work with in terms of reducing crime and violence in the Caribbean. And so I'm now going to talk a little bit about how the IDB has helped support governments in the Caribbean through citizen security justice programs. And here we have, these are the Caribbean members, IDB member states, Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, the Bahamas, Guyana, Suriname, and Barbados. And these are the countries where we currently are supporting citizen security and justice programs. And what do those programs look like? Well, they're very different from one country to another, obviously. They're implemented by a government counterpart, generally the Ministry of National Security in each country. And they include elements of building capacity to help governments increase their efficiency in reducing violence. And most of them include one or all of the 5 components that you see in this table here. Social interventions, which address violent and criminal behavior amongst young people, including substance abuse and domestic violence, particularly targeting youth and also women as victims of domestic violence. We have situational prevention, interventions and programs with the police, the judiciary system, and much more recently, the penitentiary system in terms of working with ex-offenders, in terms of rehabilitation and reducing recidivism. But most of our work currently, most of the IDB-sponsored programs work with youth is concentrated in this area of social interventions. And how does that take place? Well, we use a public health approach, which divides prevention initiatives into three categories, essentially: primary, secondary, and tertiary. And primary prevention programs focus on overall well-being of individuals, whereas secondary prevention focuses on intervening with specific populations at risk to stop them from being both victims and offenders. And tertiary would be working with those who are already involved in crime and violence. So within this, we have specified three levels of youth groups that we work with, one being low risk, which are those who are attending school and under 18 years of age. Those who are in groups 2 and 3, so medium risk would be those youth who we call it disengaged youth. They might be younger than 18 but have not completed secondary school and they're not attending school. Or those that are ages 18 to 29 who are neither in school nor working. Finally, the third group will be the high-risk individuals that we might target with secondary or tertiary programs. Those that are engaged in what we call externalizing behaviors, so substance abuse, aggression, theft, and the most highest risk group, which would be those who are already in conflict with the law. And over time, the IDB Citizen Security and Justice programs have been moving towards more targeted interventions, focusing more specifically on those at higher risk, because we know that with the limited resources that are out there, that concentrating on a power few, those that are the most at risk and also those that are most likely to change, is where we have optimal conditions to reduce crime and violence. So with that, I'm going to jump into a couple of examples of programs that the IDB, Inter-American Development Bank, has been supporting in the Bahamas and Jamaica. The Bahamas is the newest country to have a citizen security program that has been supported by the IDB. And in fact, through the Ministry of National Security, in fact, this program has been started in 2016, so it's very new. And the broader program covers a range of community violence prevention programs and strengthening of the criminal justice system being rolled out further. But what I'm going to tell you a little bit about right now is a pilot in collaboration with Youth Build International. Some of you may be familiar with Youth Build. It's started in the U.S. There's about 260 programs in some 46 states in the United States. And through Youth Build International, it has been replicated in about 15 countries around the world. So as a part of a regional pilot funded in part by the IDB, this program was implemented in the Bahamas starting in January 2016 and ending in August. And I've got a little timeline up there that I'll go through one by one. But just to give you some background on the project, prior to the pilot, Youth Build International actually met with stakeholders in the Bahamas and put together a coalition of about 30 NGOs and government agencies to study the potential for implementing the program there. And over 2015, there was a one-year planning process to bring the program to the Bahamas, which was launched in January of 2016. There was open application and enrollment, but there were certain criteria then that applicants were screened by. The pre-registrants who were screened based on those criteria were invited to a 2-week orientation called Mental Toughness to gauge their interest and ability in continuing through the program, which is something really important. I think we can have more discussion on in the question and answer. And then through February to June of this year, students took part in a variety of classroom-based courses including academics, emotional counseling, entrepreneurship, employability skills, skills training, vocational theory, and then there's an out-of-classroom component, which is the vocational practical skills in one of two chosen fields that were based on the needs identified by the business community in the Bahamas in industry of hospitality or construction. There was an academic curriculum that was developed by the coordinator of the program in the Bahamas with guidance from Youth Build International. And then the hospitality program was outsourced to a courtier of the Caribbean butlers, and the construction participants worked on practical training to build a new building for a local NGO in the Bahamas. So I should mention that the Youth Build program essentially helps young people to acquire basic education, job readiness, technical training and leadership skills, all while building permanent community assets and helping them to become community leaders. It's essentially targeted towards unemployed youth who have left school without a diploma. Let's see. And both groups, the hospitality and the construction group, were actively involved in community services and counseling throughout the program. So I'll go through a little bit more of how the program works. These are the numbers, and I apologize for the size of the font here. It's a little bit tough to see. But just to give you an idea, initially we had 103 individuals who expressed interest in participating. Of those, 87 were pre-registered, given the criteria for eligibility. And then of those, about 82 were invited to attend the 2-week orientation of mental toughness. Of those, 67 showed up for mental toughness training. After the 2 weeks, we were down to about 61 individuals. So that's really where that was the enrollment level that we consider, 61 individuals who started the program, and 58 of those showed up for the program. 25 were enrolled in the hospitality program and 33 in the construction program. And by the time we got to the end of the program, those who graduated, we were down to about 46 individuals. So nearly half of those who originally expressed interest in the program. Just to give you a bit of an idea of the profile of those enrolled, about the minority, 21%, had received a high school diploma, but were looking for work. There was the large majority had not graduated from high school. Almost 1/3 responded that they had been arrested or convicted for a crime in the past, and about 1/3 also said that they had either used or sold drugs in the past, in the recent past. And through additional interviews, there were a lot of personal stories about that gave us a bit of a flavor for who these individuals were. Youth who watched loved ones being murdered, one student whose brother was murdered in front of him, others who recounted being stabbed. It really gives you kind of a bit of a picture of who these youth are. In terms of the outcomes of the pilot program, we used FastBridge formative teaching assessments to gauge the academic achievements. The goal was to have at least 50% of the students advance 2 or more grade levels in terms of reading and mathematics, and this was one of the goals that was not met, unfortunately. But in terms of job placement, we did have 66% of the individuals that went through the program were placed and were working by the end of the program, which is considered very good by Youth Build performance standards. We also looked at the wages that they're earning, and on average, the wages that participants are earning, beneficiaries are earning, is about 10% higher than minimum wage in the Bahamas. So this is also very good in terms of the performance standards that Youth Build International puts forth. And in terms of dangerous behavior, we had a large, about half of the participants said that they were neither engaged in harmful health behaviors or violent behaviors before the program. But of those, that half that were, we had about 44% felt that their health risk behavior had been reduced after the program, and then 25% said that it was somewhat reduced. And in terms of violent behavior, 55% felt that they had changed their behavior a lot, 27% had reduced somewhat. And then finally, in terms of personal development, 85% agreed that they were more confident about their future and having improved capacity to resolve conflicts and manage their own emotions. 91% agreed that Youth Build had improved their leadership and teamwork skills. And finally, 94% said that they have the capacity to make better decisions after participating in the program. So I think there's a lot of lessons learned there, and obviously this is a pilot program designed to be adjusted and scaled up. But there's a lot more we can talk about if you have individual questions or other experiences that you'd like to share. But I'm also going to move on to our second example here, which is the Citizen Security and Justice Program in Jamaica. And this is a multifaceted crime and violence prevention initiative, again, implemented by the Ministry of National Security in Jamaica. And this is our longest standing program in the Caribbean. Just to give you an idea on the map here, those are the communities where the program is focused in Jamaica. We began in 2001 in 9 high-crime urban communities in Jamaica. And over time, in 2009, when the program was extended and expanded, I went into 28 communities. There was additional funding provided by the UK Department for Development. And then finally, in this third version, we've expanded to 50 communities, and with additional support from Global Affairs Canada as well. But I think that the most important thing here is what we've learned over the process. And if you look here, what I have in red, the new element of the CSJP3 is a risk assessment and case management system. And this is a targeted complex risk factor assessment and an electronic case management system with a new emphasis on monitoring and evaluation. Whereas the CSJP2 program was really demand-driven by individuals in the communities that we targeted, the CSJP3 is being referral-driven. So individuals are being referred from corrections, from the police, from a number of other agencies. And we're really trying to target high-risk, high and medium-risk individuals through this new approach. And I'll give you a little bit of an example of how this is working so far. And this is since the beginning of the year. Incoming beneficiaries now are, as I mentioned, coming more often from referrals from agencies rather than walk-ins, which used to be the practice in these communities that we're targeting. These agencies fill out a form, a referral form, and then, so for example, you can see here now we've got about 3,500 individuals that were referred to the program. Then these individuals passed through an initial screening. About 2,600 were screened. And of those, this initial screening is really to separate out those who are higher risk right away. Those who are deemed not in the higher risk categories are referred to other organizations or other agencies. You can see that about 63% of those who were screened were maintained in the program. And then those individuals move on to a more rigorous risk assessment. And there are 2 risk assessment instruments that are applied by community case management officers in each of the CSJP centers. There's one for youth under 18 years of age and one for over 18 years of age. And I can go more into detail about that risk assessment tool and the process of developing that, which was a very rich process. It's based on risk domains and protective factors that in the literature have shown to be related to committing acts of crime and violence. And then finally, those, so of those that went to risk assessment, about 87% were deemed high to medium risk and moved on. Those 87% were then accepted into case management. And in case management, there's a plan that is drafted between strategic team, the CSJP team, and finalized together with the individual. And it's based again on those risk domains that are identified in the assessment. So, for example, it's tailored, each plan is tailored specifically to that individual. If an individual shows risk in terms of unemployment, anger management, and, for example, substance abuse, those are the types of programs that, or interventions that they will participate in and receive. And each plan has a set of long and short-term goals. And the client then receives those specific services and also meets with the case manager monthly. And then after 6 months, there's a reassessment of where they're at, and we can consider either termination or continuation. Finally, termination, which can happen for a number of reasons, either because the goals have been achieved, or the client refuses further services, or there's non-compliance in continuing with the process, or some other reasons as well. Let's see, just a couple of key lessons learned from this process, I think, that are valid to share with this group. That it takes a lot of time to get risk assessment instruments right. So we began using some of the existing risk assessment instruments that are out there, the YSET or the HCR20 that some of you may be familiar with. And neither of these really was just right. Some of them were difficult, the case management workers felt it was difficult to develop a rapport with the individual through using these instruments, or that there was lengthy administration scoring processes that didn't work or didn't apply to the local reality. So there was a process of adapting, and we have now the Citizen Security and Justice Program has their own risk assessment tool, which I'd be happy to share with anybody who's interested. Secondly, that case plans should be simple, and that they really need to be shaped by those specific risks for each individual. And this is, I think, the key to making these programs work. Thirdly, the need to build relationships with referral agencies. So to really get to those high-risk individuals, it's necessary to build relationships with the courts, with the police, within the Ministry of National Security, other services that will be able to refer beneficiaries to the program. Fourthly, those that are at highest risk may not be the most motivated to change, and this has been a challenge. Part of this has led to what we call motivational interviewing, where we include in the risk assessment and in the assessment of how we'll work with those individuals, their motivation to change. And fifthly, in terms of specifically for the CSJP program, those who are working in the program, the case management officers, have found it challenging to live or work in communities where low-risk individuals who used to benefit from the program or used to be able to benefit from the program are no longer able to benefit from the program because of this new concentration on higher risk. And this is really, I think, a fundamental and important piece where we have invested a lot of time in sensitization and a lot of discussion, first of those community management officers, case management officers that are working in the communities, and then also more broadly within those communities of why the goals have changed, why the approach has changed. And finally, the additional administrative burden of collecting and compiling data. We know that the best initiatives are those that are targeted and that we're able to test and see how well they're doing, or to evaluate and change and adjust. But this implies collecting a good amount of data, which is not always easy to do on the fly, and it's not something that immediately that staff members necessarily see any value in. So there's a lot of work in terms of showing the importance of the data, what it's going to be used for, and really building buy-in from the staff that are going to be completing forms and putting information into the case management system. So I hope I haven't talked too much at this point, and that there's some good time for questions and answers and discussion. I'll leave my contact information here as well for anyone who's interested.
Thank you very much, Heather, for this very detailed presentation. We learned a lot about the approaches applied and the lessons learned in both Jamaica and Bahamas. Now we will take questions from the audience. Please remember that you need to raise your hand to request the floor. After that, we will unmute your mic so we can all hear your questions. If you don't have access to a microphone, please use the chat option in the platform to write your questions. We will share it with all the audience and the experts on your behalf. In terms of the questions, please start by saying your name, country, and organization, if you have one. And limit your intervention to no more than 1 minute so we can give the space to other participants. Thank you very much one more time, Heather. Now I'll give the word to Jose that will manage the questions and from the audience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a couple of questions already coming in, so I'll start by reading the questions to you. And the first question comes from Valerie Hogan, and she's asking these questions regarding to the first part of the presentation when Ms. Sutton was talking about the rates of youth as victims, and her question is, are these figures the same for females and males?
Yeah, that's a very important question, in fact. Thank you, Valerie, for bringing that up. In terms of, and I think there are a lot of different aspects that we can look at. So in terms of homicide rates, certainly very clearly males are far higher risk. And in terms of some of those other crimes that I mentioned, we do see that for property crimes, in fact, there is no significant difference between victimization rates for men and women across the Caribbean countries, but for specifically violent crimes, particularly assault and threat, we have far higher prevalence rates for males. Now, there's a very good reason for that, and that is that the survey was designed not to measure the types of violence that women and girls are generally more likely to be victims of, which is, intimate partner violence and sexual violence. This type of a survey does not measure, can't very accurately measure those types of violence, and there are a number of initiatives supported by the IDB right now to better understand and measure those types of violence being rolled out in several Caribbean countries, which we don't have good numbers on. In fact, that's probably the area where we have the least amount of information, is in terms of intimate partner and sexual violence. Now, in terms of the perpetrators' side of the coin, we do again find that males have far higher rates of arrests and imprisonments than females. So these are absolutely important components of that context to understand.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. Quick note, America Ramirez, I see you push the raised hand button. Just to remind audience members, if you want to make your intervention through your microphone, you just need to push that raised hand button, and we will let you know. We will unmute your microphone so that you can state your question. America Ramirez, please, I don't know if you have pushed the button consciously, so if we'll do one more question, and if you still have the raised hand button, we'll go ahead and unmute your mic. So please let us know by keeping that raised hand button on that you want us to unmute your microphone. Let me go to the next question. This question comes from Maria Brindlemeyer, and she's asking if are the risk assessment instruments adjusted in each country where it's being used?
Sure, yeah, and that was really a very important point. At this point, the risk assessment instrument that I presented, the strongest risk assessment instrument that we have is being used in Jamaica. Now, in the Bahamas, at this point, we did not implement a risk assessment instrument. So there was a questionnaire, but we wouldn't say it's a risk assessment instrument. That's something that will be considered eventually moving forward with the project. But absolutely, the instrument has to be adapted in country, and something that I tried to mention, I'm not sure if everybody caught, but that there are a number of risk assessment instruments out there. Particularly, we looked at two from the outset in Jamaica. The YSET, which is from the Gang Reduction Youth Development Program in the U.S. in Los Angeles, and the HCR20, which is the Historical Clinical Risk Assessment tool. And neither of these fit very well into the local context. The case management officers who are applying the risk assessment tools found them either too lengthy, they were too difficult to develop a rapport with the individual that they were talking to, or that the scoring processes were too difficult, and specifically there was a lot of effort to look at what particular risk and protective factors were most relevant in the Jamaican context. So there is a simplified instrument for Jamaica, and as I mentioned, there are two separate instruments, one for those under 18 years of age and one for 18 years or older. And I think that process was a very rich process, and it's something that you need to build into any program like this. Needs to build in time for adaptation of those instruments. It takes time. Hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you so much for that, Heather. Let me go ahead. I see America Ramirez has kept her raised hand button on. So America, if you can hear us, I will unmute your microphone. And if you can unmute it from your side, we are more than ready to listen to your question. America, if you can hear us, your microphone from your side is muted, so if you can unmute it, we will be able to hear you. While we do that, we'll leave it and see if we can have access to her audio. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question, which comes from Michael Swigart. Michael is asking, I would be interested in learning more about the mental toughness session in the Bahamas program, as well as the motivational interviews in Jamaica. What type of activities and questions are included in these program phases, and how were they developed and adapted over time?
Yeah, this is a great question. Unfortunately, this may be one of the areas where I'll have to refer you to my colleagues in Jamaica and the Bahamas for more details. The mental toughness, as I mentioned, it's a 2-week orientation. There are a number of activities. It's actually developed as part of the Youth Build program. So I believe Youth Build International may actually have some information on their website specifically for this, but it's obviously adapted by the implementing organization in country in the Bahamas, and it's the aim is to assess, as I mentioned, how willing individuals are to proceed forward, how open they are to changing their behaviors and to really moving forward and participating in this program. So the idea is to help kind of separate out some of those individuals who likely will drop out of the program right away. And in terms of the motivational interviews, some of the same. And again, I think I'll have to refer you to my colleagues in the country for more details on those processes. I don't know is there a way that I can get your contact info, or actually, if you can send me an email, my email is up there, I would be more than happy to do that.
Great, thank you so much. As you can see, Heather's contact information is on the screen. So let's move on to the next question. This is a comment from Enrique Roig. I'm going to read his comment. He says, "We have worked with the YSET and family counseling in Central America. It has been adapted with local partners, including scoring capacity. More importantly, the family intervention has had demonstrated impact in Honduras and El Salvador for reducing risk factors. It's important to note that YSET is specifically for family counseling." And that comment comes as a great segue for a question. The question is, let me just read the question. "In your experience in making targeted interventions to mitigate the risk of youth becoming victims or perpetrators, what is the most effective type of program, and how or can it be replicated in other countries, non-Caribbean countries, such as Honduras or El Salvador?"
Okay, so just a brief comment on the YSET. Absolutely, I think there's a lot of good evidence of the YSET being used outside of Los Angeles, where it was originally developed, particularly in Honduras and in Central America. And then moving on to the second question, what types of programs or interventions are most effective? Well, I mean, really what we know is that there is some evidence internationally that more specific targeted programs that are more holistic for individuals at high risk are those that are most likely going to have a greater benefit. Now that said, it's important to know in each different context that you're working, well, who are those high risk individuals? What are the specific risk and protective factors that are more associated with a particular group of beneficiaries that you're going to be working with? And it's hard to say. I know we all want to hear that there is a recipe for a solution. There really is not, but there are a good amount of evidence-based programs, so programs that have been implemented in more than one context around the world, and that have shown reductions in recidivism, in youth being rearrested or recommitting crimes, in reducing health risk behaviors, and a lot of that information is surprisingly available online. There's a good amount of information out there. If you're familiar with crimesolutions.gov, the Blueprints project, where they actually go through the Campbell collaboration. They have a number of meta-analysis of these successful programs. And I think those can help inform, depending on the specific context that you're working, what kind of programs might be you might want to try to implement. And then from there, of course, they have to be keenly adapted to the local realities. And the most important thing here, from my perspective, and of course you can see that I'm the research coordinator at the IDB, but is having data and information to drive these programs, and also to be able to adequately test them and say, in a way that they really can fail, and a way that is honest, and that says, this program isn't working, and can look at, well, can it be adjusted, can it be changed, or would our resources be better implemented in other programs?
Great, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and read Enrique's follow-up question on that. Enrique Roy, the audience member who made the comments on YSET. He's asking, do you have any information regarding factors as to why some youth didn't obtain job placements after the construction and hospitality training, and any lessons, recommendations for similar types of interventions?
Yeah, so, well, I'm glad you asked. I think actually if we look at the numbers today, it may be higher. The 66% that obtained job placement was actually a week before the end of the period where job placement activities were still ongoing. So we did have some indication that a couple more individuals were likely going to be placed soon, and I have to follow up on that to get you the actual numbers. But you know, I think actually there is a report out on this, and I'll admit that I have to delve a little bit further into it to see for those individuals who were not placed what the restrictions were. But we do know that the very large majority of them were placed, and in many cases there was in some cases there was in fact a mismatch between the program that they participated in, so hospitality or construction, and the individual goals and what they wanted to do and work. So there were a couple of individuals, particularly in the construction program, that were not interested in continuing in construction. So that's something that I think was one of the lessons learned as well, was to take into consideration in terms of the vocational training that's offered, not only what is interesting for employers, or what the opportunities that are out there, which there was a process of listening through the Chamber of Commerce and looking at economic data to see where youth are more likely to be employed. But there is, I think, something valid to say for the interests of those individuals. So I think in moving forward with the program, that's something that needs to be taken into consideration, is what are the particular specific interests, if we can broaden the range of opportunities, vocational programs for these individuals, so that it's not so limited. Let's see, there are a number of lessons learned moving forward. It's so new that I'm afraid to actually go into all of them, because I think there's a lot more to learn as this program gets scaled up and moved forward. And I'd welcome if any of you out there want to offer your opinions as well. I know that many of you are engaged in similar programs, so please don't limit yourselves to questions.
Great, thank you so much, Heather. Yes, so just to make sure, we're going to do one or two more questions, so please feel free to type down or ask to open your mic right now so that we can include it in the session. We're heading towards the end of the session, so right now will be the right time to make your intervention. Enrique Roy is saying that he has a raised hand. Unfortunately, I cannot see that you have a raised hand, but it doesn't matter. I can open your microphone. So Enrique, if you're ready, I will unmute your microphone so that you can go ahead and make your intervention. Okay, go ahead. Enrique? Enrique, if you can hear us? Enrique, can we try? There, yes, we can hear you now.
Great. Now, first of all, thank you, Heather, for the presentation. This has been really interesting. I just wanted to add to my comment earlier about the YSET and family counseling. Just to mention that, so I was at USAID for 5 years managing the CARSI portfolio when we signed a partnership with the City of LA to begin piloting the YSET and family counseling in Central America and Mexico. I'm currently now with Creative Associates here managing the Citizen Security Practice Area. But I wanted to add that, so basically the YSET tool is specifically used to tie into a family counseling intervention, not a series of prevention services. So I'm not sure in the case of Jamaica whether that's what they were trying to do, and that's where maybe they had some difficulties. For the most part, in the pilots that we've done in Honduras and El Salvador, we've been able to adapt the tool itself and the scoring capability with local NGO and university partners, but more importantly, the family counseling intervention, which is really the meat of the program, which is a 12 to 18-month intervention that we do with those youth who score higher than 4 risk factors on a scale of 9. And so what we've seen over time in the pilot that we did in Honduras was that there was a 77% reduction in risk factors for that program based on the family counseling approach alone. And so that's what we've tried to focus on, and what we try and make clear to people. Again, it's not a tool to be used to identify a series of other types of interventions like CBT or sports programs, these types of things. It's specific to a family counseling approach, and we have been able to adapt it in very difficult contexts with low capacities. So we're actually looking at doing this now in the Caribbean, so I'd be interested in talking to you more about it later, but we have a new program with USAID that we're starting up in St. Lucia, Guyana, and St. Kitts. So part of that effort will be to incorporate family counseling as an intervention. So, we'll see in a year and a half from now where we are with that, but it's something that we're looking forward to in terms of adaptation of the tool there. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Indeed, the YSET is gauged towards family counseling, and this is one of the reasons why it had to be adapted. As I mentioned, through the CSJP program, we're looking at a more wider array of services and for each individual. So family counseling is one essential component, indeed, which is why we incorporated several aspects of the YSET. But it is a broader range of programs that individuals have access to beyond just family counseling. So that's a good point.
Great, thank you both for.
And speaking more with you about working on this in the Caribbean.
Great, thank you both for the intervention. We're going to go ahead and tackle one more question before we close the session. This question is regarding the Bahamas Youth Field Program, where 103 individuals showed interest, but only 46 graduated. So the question is, what can we do to incentivize youth not only to show interest, but to follow through the whole process and graduate from the program?
Mm-hmm. Oh, wouldn't I like to have the answer to that? I think there was actually a previous webinar specifically addressing some of these issues in terms of recruitment, retaining, and placement. And I'll be honest, we don't have the answers to that question. I think there are some things that we can do, but I also think that it's important that we recognize that not every individual who starts out comes through the initial interest period, may need to or may actually end up being able to benefit from every program. So it's important to concentrate resources and energy, particularly, as I mentioned before, which is on those that are higher risk, but also that are willing and interested in changing their behavior. And that's where you get the optimal outcome. And so that's really what we've been trying to move towards in targeting youth for IDB-supported programs. I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, I think with this, Peter, we are going to close the session. I don't know if you want to give some closing comments before I do my final comments. If so, please, the floor is yours.
Sure. I'd just like to mention that I think that this initiative is a really really wonderful initiative, and I'm so glad to have had a lot of these comments and questions. It's very enriching, and I'm glad that we can all be online together discussing this, and we should continue discussing lessons learned, difficulties, challenges in these programs, and what seems to be working, what seems to not be working. If we can continue this dialogue and this discussion, I think there's a lot of benefit to be had.
Excellent. Well, Heather, thank you very much on behalf of the YBT and the Youth Power Learning and the COP on Youth Peace and Security. I think you did a great presentation. We all learned a lot. To all the participants, I also want to thank for your interest and for joining us in this session. Please remember, if you're not part of the COP, to join the COP on Youth Peace and Security and to visit our platform, www.youthpower.org. It's very important not only to be able to listen about what is going on, but also to share your experiences. Like Heather mentioned, this is bidirectional. I think today we learned the importance of the context, the importance of the evidence base, and also how the positive youth development approach can be a perfect complement for this. From our side also, we're working on a few indicators that can help actually measure the impact and define probably the next steps on how we can complement these existing initiatives, and we congratulate Heather and the IDD for these efforts. Once again, thank you very much for your participation, and please join the community practice, send us your feedback, and also send us your recommendations in terms of other issues or topics that you would like to learn, because our job also is to identify those areas and experts and share it with you. Thank you so much. Have a good day.